The Kitab-i-Ad and the Will and Testament of Abdul-Baha. Okay, if we have that, that's enough with the Bible and the Quran and the other religious books to show that this fulfills prophecy, because that's the charter by which we can set up our society. And it tells us that all difficult problems will be brought not to the Guardian, but to the Universal House of Justice, of which he's the chairperson and has a vote of one. The head and body both, they're inseparable. When we say Universal House of Justice, we mean head and body both. That's what we mean, okay? So we don't have to keep saying the word guardian a lot. So the House of Justice with the head and body both, this will resolve all difficult problems. So if all the Baha'i writings were destroyed and all the Baha'i International Center was wiped out in a nuclear war, and there were no Baha'i letters or books or tablets, there were no copies of the hidden words, there was no seven valleys, there was no book of certitude, nobody could find the Octus, it doesn't matter. There were no writings of Abdul-Baha, some answered questions was obliterated and destroyed. What's important is we have the document of the charter so we can establish the society on earth and have the universal collective security agreement. So first of all, understand that. Also understand that on our deathbed, when we're leaving this world to go to the next, we're not going to have any books. You can't take the Bible or the Quran or the Octus or the Will and Testament with you in the next life. The purpose of this revelation is to have the covenant of God written on our hearts, minds, and souls, to be directly in the presence of God, to have said our prayers and read the writings to the point that that's part of who we are. That's the language we speak. Those are the heartfelt phrases and the words we know. We don't need a hard copy of any of these books. If in the ancient eternity of my essence, I knew my love for thee and have engraved upon thee my image and revealed to thee my beauty. See, it's engraved upon the hearts, minds, and souls of all the believers. So while we're on earth, we have a luxurious time right now to enjoy these many writings. But there's going to be a dearth of Baha'i literature. We'll be lucky if any of these things survive. Now that everything's electronic, nobody buys hard copies of anything. And in a nuclear war where there's an electromagnetic pulse, it will knock out all electronics and people won't be able to use their computers. So if they don't have a hard copy on paper of their holy book, or like the Bible or the Will and Testament and Kitab-i-Ad or the Quran, they won't be able to even read it. So people don't realize how fragile everything is, even that we have now. Next, it's not up to the Guardian as one person to decide what the authentic manuscript writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha are. That the same way archaeologists and scientists were able to find the Dead Sea Scrolls and identify what those manuscripts were, there's experts who are able to identify the authentic writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha. And if they, so that is going to be settled in the future also. It's not a cause for concern or worry. Even losing the other writings is no concern for cause or worry. Also, anytime somebody finds an obscure writing and they claim that it contradicts the core explicit truth of the covenants in the Bible, in the Old Testament, like Psalms 89, the everlasting covenant as fulfilled in the Will and Testament, or that these writings contradict the Kitab-i-Ad or the Will and Testament, well, then that's just false interpretation. And then next, with the translations that they're publishing, they're doing a good job, but they don't really know what's being referred to. Baha'u'llah's writings are mostly, he alludes to stuff. So like you already have to know what happened first. And then when you read Baha'u'llah's letter, you go, oh, he's referring to this, but he does it in code names. Like he talks about Tehran. but you wouldn't know it. He mentions the land of Ta. If you didn't know that was Tehran and you read his writings, you'd read all his writings and be like, what's the land of Ta? And that's just one example. There's other things that he says. A lot of people think that what he's talking about is flowery, like he talks about the heavenly court, or then he talks about the ocean of revelation. These are actually technical terms for spiritual realities and metaphysical subjects that he's very specific about, that he's alluding to in certain ways. And unless somebody finds the key verse, they're not going to understand it. For example, all throughout Baha'u'llah's personal writings and tablets and epistles, he refers to himself as the Mazlum, which Shoghi Effendi translated as the wrong one, or the wrong one of the world. And he would read this. He says, this wrong one. And then he'd keep talking. Or then he'd write something. He'd say, and this wrong one. Well, in one of his tablets only, the Surah of Blood, the Surah Dam, he defines what he means by wrong one. And then he says it's a central characteristic and a teaching that metaphysically, spiritually, that everybody should get involved with. So without that key tablet from the Surah Idam, when we read all of his other stuff and we see wrong one, we wouldn't have a clue of what he's referring to. So if they translate it as oppressed one or wrong one, there's no substance to it, because the translator isn't just translating word for word, they're translating concepts. And because their heads are outside of the concept of firmness in the covenant, they can't translate these things so that they're meaningful and connect with the other published writings. And sometimes when they translate them, it even contradicts the other published explicit texts. So this is the difficulty in translation. Again, when we were talking about government earlier and control and power, they got it in their head that what the Guardian's role was, looking at Shoghi Effendi, was they were the one who could make the authoritative translation. And to go against Shoghi Effendi's to go against God. God forbid we translate one of those passages and choose a different word in English than he chose, because then the wrath of God will be upon us. We went against Shoghi Effendi, the way he translated it. Oh, come on. So now that he's not there, they're all hijacking his empty seat of translation, as if being a translator makes somebody big and self-important and self-aggrandizing. This is just ridiculous. Everybody should be able to read the writings in the original language if they want for themselves, and make their own translations and translate them in a different language, and even have their own personal understanding of what those writings is in their translations. When we say that there's going to be an official approved translation in English or approved publication, this is because we want to have a unity on these texts. But translation from one language into the other leads to variance. And we want people to discuss this. Abdul-Baha states firmness in the covenant means unity and diversity. It doesn't mean unity in conformity, like everybody goose-stepping or marching to the same drum. You know, all of our hearts beat as one for our spiritual love of God, but the religion's unorganized and the people are free to do this. So there's no real concern for whatever they're doing with the writings or not. Obviously, they've blown their own credibility. People don't trust them. When they published some answered questions in English, they removed the seventh angel prophecy. So how can we trust people to say that they're translating new texts when, especially if they're trying to say it overthrows the covenant? I haven't seen anything like that. When this is all subject to, we don't even know where these texts have come from or who's authenticated them. There's no transparency. Everything's hidden behind the scenes. There's now, in the absence of Baha'u'llah's family, through Abdul-Baha, Mason Rimi, and Pepe Ogson, there's a nepotism clique that's taken over the control of things on Mount Carmel. We just have to get used to the idea, the same as when we die and go into the next world. When we go in the next world, there's no Mount Carmel there. There's no books. There's no gardens. There's no shrines. There's actually living Baha'u'llahs alive there. Abdul-Baha's alive, the Bab's still alive, and we will be alive there, and we will meet with them. And these people who have done this stuff to Baha'u'llah's revelation and his writings and the shrines that Abdul-Baha helped build at Baji and Mount Carmel for the Bab's shrine, how are they going to come and meet with the actual founders in the next life when what they've done is, was in opposition to their teachings, the spirit of their teachings and their covenant? That's a difficulty that individuals will have to undergo. Our purpose in exposing this now is so people can avoid that difficulty. Then I'll conclude with this. For example, back in the 1990s, when the United States was decided to attack Iraq, after fomenting the Iran-Iraq war to deplete those two wonderful civilizations of their spirit and culture and energy, what a shame that when this happened, they said that in one of the bombings, they killed a bunch of children. And Madeline Albright, the Secretary of State for Bill Clinton, the American president at that time, she said, they asked her on 60 Minutes about the children, and she said a disparaging comment. I don't remember the exact words right now. It was horrible. It was as if it didn't matter that all those babies were killed, the way we're seeing families killed in Ukraine. So Dr. Leland Jensen called her on the carpet on this. And he said that Madeline Albright, when she made that comment on 60 Minutes, was not bright at all. And then I put this comment in some of my press releases, and we sent this out. Well, lo and behold, Madeline Albright realized the mistake that she made, because Dr. Jensen called her out on this specifically. She said that that comment on 60 Minutes was the worst thing that she had ever done in her whole life. Her attitude, where it came from, her feelings, and she said it was the greatest shame in her career. And because of that shame, and because of being called out into the light, she repented from that. And she became a firm advocate of spirituality in peace talks and negotiations. And she said and wrote that we can't ignore the presence of God in the room when we're in the room too, talking about how to set up a security plan or a management of fair use for holy shrines in Israel, or this problem between Russia and the United States. And she just passed on this last week, so her name has come back in the news. So this is the reason why we're doing this. We're not trying to shame people or put them down or make their life miserable or make them the butt of jokes or put downs for other people. But like Madeline Albright, if we call somebody out on the carpet, they have an opportunity, like she did, to completely recant and change their ways. Now that she's ascended, she spent the last 10 or more years of her career, or 20, promoting spirituality and the importance of God in human and governmental work. She's a spiritual giant, and dying right now during the Ukraine crisis, her legacy of this teaching has even more at the forefront. And we can be sure when she went into the next life that she was greeted by Abdul-Baha and introduced to Baha'u'llah for her magnanimous work of her becoming a true Baha'i. And we even had more contact with her later on in the story when she was in Aspen, Colorado in 2003, and so forth and so on. So we can't just say, like it says in the Quran, do not say to anybody who comes up to you, thou art not a believer. There's Baha'is all over the world who are doing great things, who are firm in the covenant, who know exactly who we are. And like FDR, they're not part of the Baha'i administration, and they're working to settle these problems. Do not worry in the least what the rebels are doing on Mount Carmel. It doesn't matter what they publish. Anything that contradicts the truth, we're not going to accept it anyhow. Anything that's fishy, we're not interested in it. And in the future, we can always go back and have experts like who went over the Dead Sea Scrolls go through these different manuscripts to ascertain authentic documents written by the hand and pen of Baha'u'llah himself. And keep in mind, these documents are also in private collections still, and those people never turn them over to them. So after this whole thing's sorted out, those manuscripts will come to light, and experts will still have to authenticate those as well. But we have enough of the laws of the Octus published where you can go through and make a codification of personal status and things like this for yourself, which the individuals have done. So we're not abandoned. And because we have the true universal house of justice with the Davidic king as the president, anything that we're missing, we can supplement through legislation of the universal house of justice. So we will be safe and under the protection of God, and as fallible people will receive infallible guidance to get us through every difficult circumstance and occasion that presents itself in each time we live in. And certainly we're guided right now during this war catastrophe.